welcoming into Stacey Washington now, J. Michael Waller. His book is Big Intel. I'm so excited to have the book and Jay with me today. Thank you for coming on.
Nice to be with you, Stacy.
All right, so let's talk about this. Why did you write this very important book?
There was a lot that happened in the past 40 years that I never talked about. I saw things happening, and then all of a sudden the CIA and FBI both went woke, seemingly all of a sudden. And I thought our country's in trouble. People need to understand the problem and how it happened and what we can do about it.
So there's so much about what happened in COVID-19 that a 20-year ago America would have handled differently. We're leaders in research and cataloging information about our populations. And so in if it was 20 years ago and the same pandemic happened, they would have actually divided certain groups of Americans off and begin to watch them and their healthcare outcomes based on the way that they reacted to either COVID-19, the actual virus, or the shot, or both. I've noticed that about research. Whenever I go and try to research how did this disease develop or how did this treatment develop, I always find studies where researchers and doctors and all the people in that space will gather groups of Americans together and look at their outcomes. They look at their physiology, they look at their reaction to drugs and treatments, and they try to plot out what the best course is for doctors to take with them. So many things that they can actually find out by looking at data. But that was the least of what we did during the pandemic. They didn't look at data. They shut down information and they really censored Americans who wanted to do exactly that.
This is the whole problem with the whole American science and research sector, and looking at it from the point of view of counterintelligence and foreign intelligence. You don't have the empirical basis for gathering and analyzing information like you used to have. Where now we're in a post-truth world where facts are no longer facts, and facts can mean what you want them to mean. And so there are no objective forms of evidence anymore, no objective methodology anymore that matters, because everything is now outcomes based. What do we want to prove for ideological reasons that we can back up with however we choose to analyze what we choose to collect?
Yeah. And so, Jay, in your book, in chapter one, you start off with your own personal story and you are giving a history here from World War II and something called it was a private network called 61. And so you really go into the history to give the reader everything they need as background to be able to then forge ahead into the thesis of the book about the CIA and the infiltration of wokeness into our intelligence community.
Right. Yeah, the 61 was the group. It was an international group of like-minded Cold Warriors that predated my time by a generation or more. And it was there because even at the time, the Western intelligence services had been compromised by the Soviets, by communist agents, and by people with worldviews that didn't view real evidence as real evidence, or didn't believe that we were up against a Soviet enemy that was seeking to harm us, or that there was a Soviet enemy at all. So this was an important part in Big Intel, where my first foray into intelligence was as a college student, where I was recruited into a private network that was funded by the CIA director to find things that the CIA itself could not find about what the Soviets were doing to undermine our country.
So this is a lifelong effort for you working in intelligence, and then all of your experience comes together in the book because you're observing what's happening to our country during the pandemic. So can you give us a little bit of that? Because I know that there's no way we could cover everything. This book is very, very thick and it's detailed. And I think the storytelling in it is fantastic because you take us back to certain points in history where you're personally connected and you give us information we couldn't otherwise get if you weren't there or if you didn't have this research. So that I encourage people to get the book wherever books are sold. My favorite is Amazon. But tell us about specifically Obama's great cultural revolution, how that intersects with the pandemic.
Well, it intersected with the pandemic because what people like Obama did, people who were raised with the idea of critical theory, which was the cultural Marxism side of tearing apart our culture, making us lose faith in our institutions, in our religion, in our patriotic principles, in our families, in ourselves, and to just tear us all apart. So this is an old idea. It's nothing new. But what happened when Obama became president was, for the first time in our history, because of 9/11 and President George W. Bush's actions to fight terrorism, we had a centralized intelligence service, and a series of them actually that were now under a single central leadership, a newly centralized and empowered FBI, and a massive Department of Homeland Security that never existed, plus laws like the Patriot Act to enable them to function in ways the Constitution never envisioned. We kind of went along with that in the war against terrorism, but then when Obama came, he just reached in from the top and was able to politicize everything for his own cultural Marxist agenda. We as Americans kind of saw it, but we didn't really know what to do or see how it affected us until the pandemic, until the lockdowns, until we saw the arbitrariness of central government and the power that it could impose on everybody, and the covering up for the communist Chinese and their culpability. And then the realizations that we had government funding of these American health institutions that were working with the Chinese Communist Party's virus labs, and we're not getting the truth about it. So all of these things coalesced together so that by the time the pandemic hit, Americans started becoming aware of what had happened to us as a country.
Yeah, and I think it was that awakening. It felt as if we kind of woke up one day, we were locked down, we couldn't go to church or the gym, and we realized that the thing that we'd always said is impossible in America had actually occurred. So we have just a couple minutes left here, Jay, and I'm so appreciative of your time here on the program and the book itself. Anything else that you'd like to leave our viewers with about the book?
A whole lot. First, the book it will also tell the reader they have something to do. Citizens this year, when they vote for sheriff, they can. The sheriff has a huge amount of power to limit what the central government can do in their county. So we've got to ask every single sheriff incumbent, every single sheriff candidate, what they are going to do and how the citizen can help them and watch them keep the federal government at bay from our local communities.
That's perfect. So I think the big assignment is to get together with some friends, get the book, maybe meet up every other week and discuss chapters and kind of relate to the stories inside. Informing yourself is much, much more of an effort in our information age because we're constantly bombarded with our phones, our little supercomputers. But the sitting down and taking time to absorb information from a book and discussing it with other people is an art form that we should never let go of. And as long as we have great authors like yourself, I think we'll be good to go. J. Michael Waller, thank you for joining me tonight on Stacy Washington Now.
Thank you, Stacy.
All right. And we will be back with more now after this on Salem News Channel.